Okay, so in this brief lecture, we're going to talk about APA style, and this is designed to be a primer of APA formatting and style. Now, what I want to call attention to is that I focus on shifts from the APA 6th edition to the 7th edition, and just the general pieces of papers and the general concepts, but it's not possible to cover everything that's important in 45 minutes. So I'm just going to cover general principles and then encourage you to get the APA manual as a reference guide. So this is what the APA 7th edition looks like. You can see a picture of the manual on the right. It regulates style and form, how you write within the body of the text, how you do in-text citations, and how you cover references. So there are three overarching principles in how you write any APA style paper. It's got to be clear, be very specific, and make sure that it's understood what you're trying to convey in all of your explanations. Be concise. Say a lot with as few words as possible. Some of you have written papers and you might have had professors say, oh, there's fluff in this document. They were probably telling you that you had sentences that were unnecessary. So you need to work on concision. And be plain, use as simple descriptive adjectives as possible. Try and avoid jargon as much as possible because people don't always get it. So if you ask a person, in your recent myocardial infarction, did you have hypertension? Some people may not know what that means, but if you ask it in a very simple, plain language, in your recent heart attack, did you have high blood pressure? That is much easier for people to understand. So that we aspire for the same thing when we write. Now, there are different types of papers. So for experimental psychology and research methods, you will probably have either a quantitative article or you will have a literature review. Now, but there are others. So let me explain what a quantitative article is. This is an empirical research study with statistical analyses. So the various components of a quantitative report is you have a title page, abstract, intro, method, results, discussion, and obviously your references, tables, figures, and appendices as necessary, but that's a quantitative report. Now, what's the difference between a quantitative report and a qualitative research study? Well, a qualitative research study usually the findings or results are described in words, not numbers. So you still have the title page, you still have the abstract, you still have the intro, you still have the method, but it's the results section that is described in words rather than statistical means. And then you have your discussion, references, tables, figures, etc. And then a literature review. Well, a literature review is you might have that in your research methods course, but this is very common to have in most of your courses. So when we talk about psychology, most of your courses are going to have you write a paper and it's going to be in the form of a literature review. So there you're going to have your title page and you're going to have your introduction, you're going to have your thesis statement, your summary, which is the body of the paper, and then you're going to have your references. Now, what happens if you're assigned a paper from a psychology professor and it's not clear how to do it because it's not a quantitative report, qualitative report, or an extensive literature review? The best thing you could do is first consult your professor, ask them, what do you want me to do? That can be very helpful. Then, if you don't get guidance, always consult the APA manual, because if you follow the manual for style and form and the general principles, it's hard for the professor to take points off. So all essays should be typed, double spaced, 1 inch margins all around. And I say that because it's not always guaranteed that it's set to 1 inch margin. So if you have Microsoft Office, sometimes it's set to 1.25 margin. So you have to check to make sure the margins are 1 inch all around. You also want to make sure you're using a typeset or font of 10 to 12 point font, and make sure it's standard paper, not legal size paper. Standard paper is 8.5 by 11. Now, uh, previously, we wanted people to write in Times New Roman 12 point font. However, one of the interesting changes in formatting is that there are a whole bunch of other fonts that APA Style has now said you can use, including Calibri and Arial 11, which are actually the default for many word processing files. The running head is typically omitted on student papers unless your instructor tells you otherwise. And because I am training you to be professionals, in my classes, I still want the running head, even though I know that in other classes, your professor might say you don't need it. So that's a formatting change. And then the levels of heading were changed for levels 3, 4, and 5, which we'll talk about a little bit later. And that was done to increase readability. So again, every page of your essay should have a page number on the top right. So you'll see on the right, this is page number 5. If it's a professional paper, you have to have the header, the page header. Notice there's no words running head. That was pulled out, and I'm going to mention that and show that as we go forward. Now, in some classes for student paper, they only require the page number, but not the header here where my cursor is moving over. Ask your professor, because in my classes, I still require it, even though I know other classes they don't. So again, notice one of the major distinctions in AP Style is that they made some subtle changes in the rules for professional versus student papers. Now, a professional paper is something that you're going to submit for publication in a scholarly journal. A student paper speaks for itself. It's for one of your classes. And these differences impact your title page. So let's start with a student title page for many, many classes. You'll notice that the page number's on the right, but there's no header. Then you have the title, or pardon me, you have, yes, the title in bold, because all level 1 headings are bold, and that extends beyond the body of the paper in APA 7th edition. And then you have the authors. If it's appropriate, the department and the university, the course it was for, the professor it was for, and the year and date it was submitted. That's a student paper. Now, because the header is clear, we don't need to do the label running head. So in red, that's highlighted as something that's removed from the 6th edition to 7th edition. And this can be seen very clearly in a professional paper. So you'll notice, again, similar to the student paper, you had the page number. Now you have the page header. But unlike the 6th edition, notice we removed the words running head. And then now here you have the authors, the department, the university, and any kind of affiliation they have will be superscript. Now, we also add an author's note for professional papers that includes the person's ORCID ID. Now, an ORCID ID is basically a number assigned to researchers that you use for all of your publications, so it makes it easier for them to find. If you have any affiliation changes or any acknowledgments or disclosures or correspondence information, that goes in your author's note. But this is the professional title page. And actually for my experimental classes, I actually require you to use this style rather than the student style. But as I'm going to go back to the previous slide, you'll notice that the words running head were dropped from the 6th edition to the 7th edition. Okay. Now, fast forward to the abstract. The abstract is on page 2. Again, you have a page number. Again, if it's a professional paper, you have the header. If it's a student paper, you don't have the header there. Then you have the word abstract bolded. Then you write your abstract. Your abstract should be anywhere between 150 to 250 words. It should, unlike most paragraph structures, when we come to the abstract, we do not indent. Do not indent. And then we add a series of keywords, a short list of keywords, which are basically, if someone were to search for this article, what words would you recommend? I require 6 keywords. So now here's the general format and essays. You're going to have a title page, you're going to have an abstract, you're going to have your body, depending on whether it's a quantitative, qualitative, literature review, or other. All that description was in about the body, what's covered, and then you have your references. So now you have the main body of which is the text. That starts on page 3. You have your full title at the top of the page. Everything from the beginning of the paper all the way through the end of the discussion or the end of the body should go continuously without any page breaks. The only time you're going to start new page breaks is when you get to the references section. So when we do citations, we do citations either in a parenthetical way or as a signal phrase, right? That's in-text citations. When it's parenthetical, the word parenthetical comes from the word parenthesis. So your citation is gonna be in parenthesis. And a word signal phrase means it's gonna be written as part of the sentence. Now, here are some just general changes in points of view and voice. Previously, it was that you couldn't use personal pronouns. Now we allow you to do personal pronouns as long as it's your study. So the way, and I highlight in blue the way it should be, and in red the way it should not be. So we conducted an experiment. If it's your study, feel free to use the personal pronoun of we. Way back when, in I guess it was APA 5th edition, we used the phraseology, the authors conducted a study, even to talk about ourselves. And speaking about oneself in the third person, it really seemed, I guess, impersonal. So now we allow for first person point of view. We also require active voice rather than passive voice. And this goes back to clarity and concision. Look at these 2 sentences. We ask participant questions. That's a very nice way of stating in your procedure how you did things. And this is what it used to be, and it's wrong now. The participants have been asked questions by the researchers. So you could see have been asked as passive voice. And you could also see that there is a whole bunch of extra words that are unnecessary, so it's not really concise. So on this slide, the 2 major points are when you're talking about your study, use the first person pronouns, personal pronouns, and when you're writing, use active voice, not passive voice. Now, another change in mechanics and style is that we use 1 space after a period at the end of a sentence. It used to be, some people said 2, some people said 1, some people said in a draft it's written different than for the final manuscript. But now everybody is in agreement that you only use 1 space after a period. And then in terms of linguistic example, the term, the singular pronoun they, for people who are non-binary, gender non-binary, has been changed from they italicized, which we're no longer doing, to in the 7th edition in the blue, they in quotes, but not italicized. And that tells the reader that we're talking about a person who's gender non-binary, maybe gender fluid or whatnot. And this is designed to increase sensitivity to diversity factors, right? So it could be alienating if you just use the term he or she. So anyway, this is one of the changes. So when we talk about the levels of heading, the APA manual uses 5 levels of heading. And what you will see is that a level 1 heading is bold, centered, with the first letter of each of the major words capitalized. Level 2 heading is then left align, bold, and then capitalize all the major words. And then level 3 is flush left, bold, italicized with case headings and so forth. So here's what it looks like. And this particular slide is trying to tell you just format. And here would be what it would look like using the levels of heading using the new 5-level system. So again, look at level 1 heading where my cursor is. It says methods. And actually that should say method. And then it's bold, center aligned, and the first letter of the word is capitalized. Now, level 2 heading is bold and left aligned. Level 3 heading is left aligned, bold, and italicized. Level 4 heading is indented, left aligned, bold, followed by a period, and that's when you start writing. That's part of the sentence structure. For a level 1, 2, and 3 heading, those headings do not go on the same line as the actual paragraph. But for a level 4 and 5 heading, it's part of the paragraph and indented. All right, so those are the levels of heading. Now let's talk about in-text citation. What you're looking at here is an in-text citation for one author. So you have the author's last name followed by the year. Now, the first Lahiri, that is used for when you're paraphrasing. I'll say 2 things. It's a parenthetical citation when you're paraphrasing. Parenthetical because the author's name is in parenthesis, and paraphrasing because you're not using direct quotes. If you were to use direct quotes, the second example below that says Lahiri, comma, 2002, comma, page 501, now you have a parenthetical citation when you're using a direct quote. Notice the difference is that when you use a direct quote, you must cite the page number that you're getting the quote from. That's very, very crucial. The other thing that I'll tell you about formatting is that your parenthetical citation goes before the period. This is a common mistake that people make when they're using MLA. They put the citation after the period, but in APA style, the parenthetical citation goes before the period. Now here, again, here's an example of a signal phrase. So now it's not a parenthetical citation in the top one. Here it's written as part of the sentence. A signal phrase is another way of saying as you're citing the author as part of the sentence. So here you have Caruth 1996 has stated that the traumatic response frequently entails, quote, blah, blah, blah. So now it's a signal phrase citation. So only the year is in parenthesis. And because it has a quote, you still have to have the page number. And you'll notice that the page number goes at the end of the sentence. The author's name goes at the beginning of the sentence. You could do a similar way of citing, putting it as a parenthetical citation when you have everything together at the end of the sentence. So for example, at the bottom, Caruth, comma, 1996, comma, page 11, all of that's in parenthetical citation. So the first Caruth example on this slide is an example of a signal phrase, which is a fancy way of saying citing as part of the sentence. Because it's a quotation, you have page numbers. And the second example is a parenthetical citation using a quote in one author. Okay. So you'll notice that with paraphrasing and end with direct quotes, you give the author's last name. So in this case, it'll be Fussell, 1975, the author's last name followed by the year. And this is an example of one author with a parenthetical citation. Now, it's interesting when we have multiple citations, right? And as a signal phrase, here would be an example of how you would do it. You do Higonnet et al. 1987, Marcus 1989, and Rate and Tate 1997. Now, this particular slide gives you several things. One is the principle of et al., which is Latin for and others, and we'll explain when you use et al. And when you don't use et al. For APA 7th edition. It shows you when you have one author as a signal phrase citation, when you have two authors as a signal phrase citation. So if you look at Higonnet et al., you could deduce that the new APA style suggests that anytime you have three or more authors in the body of the text, you use et al. So Higonnet would have three or more authors. So again, looking at two authors, doing a direct quote, using it as a signal phrase. So again, Rate and Tate, two authors, because it's part of the sentence, it's a signal phrase according to feminist researchers. The year is cited, and then the page number goes after the quotation, but before the period once again. So I think I showed you that, again, how you would do quotations as a signal phrase. You could write it according to Xavier 2008 quote page, or you could just start with the person say Xavier argued that quote page. Try and use signal verbs such as suggested, argued, reported, concluded, contended, maintained, always in the past tense because you're citing other people's research from past work. Now, what do you do when you're sentence that you wrote or the paraphrase statement that you wrote, you're benefiting from more than one journal article? Well, the way to do that is to do a parenthetical citation and divide the articles by a semicolon. So Koshru, 2005 is one author, one article, and Smith 2008 is a separate article with a different author. Now, you'll also know that when you have multiple citations, you alphabetize by the first author's last name. So why was it that Koshru went before Smith? The answer is that K comes before S in the English alphabet. So another thing to know is that the difference between a parenthetical citation And a signal phrase, if you're writing, according to feminist researchers, rate and Tate as a signal phrase, you use the AND, but all parenthetical citations, you use the ampersand, which is the squiggly law N sign. It looks like Jacobi and Myers or whatever. You always see the N sign. So use the ampersand for parenthetical citations. So now, as I mentioned, how do we handle et al? Et al is when you have multiple authors. If you have 3 or more authors in the new edition, you use et al. So you'll look in the red. In the 6th edition, you would list the authors out if it were 3 to 5. But that changed in the 7th edition, that anytime you have 3 or more authors, you just say Taylor et al. Followed by the year. And notice et al. Is ET space AL period, comma. So it's not et period al period. All right. So the same idea, showing you how to use 6 or more authors. There's been no change from 6th edition to 7th edition, but I figured I'd let you know anyway. So Smith et al., that is a signal phrase, and then Smith et al. In the parenthesis is the parenthetical citation. So what do you do when you're citing a source and you don't have an author's name? Well, you can do as a signal phrase, according to Indiana Jones Federal Accountability System, that would be the title on the web page, right? Quote, and notice it's in quotes to tell the reader that that's the title of the web page. Or you can do it as a parenthetical citation using anywhere between 1 to 3 words in quotes. So Indiana quote 2008. That would be how you cite an unknown source. If you're citing organizations, you would cite the Food and Drug Administration, but before you use abbreviations, you would have to put it in a parenthetical statement. So if you use the top one, the data collected by the Food and Drug Administration 2008, if you didn't do the abbreviation, then you would still have to write it again out. But it's ideal the first time you mention an organization, put the abbreviation there so that the next time you use that source, you could just say FDA experts tested, as you see at the bottom of the page. What happens when you have authors who have the same last name? This is very common in psychology because many times people follow their relatives into a discipline. So a good example of this would be Sigmund and Anna Freud, right? So if you're writing about psychoanalysis and traditional psychoanalysis, you might cite the works of Sigmund Freud and Anna Freud. What happened if you are citing them in the same article or manuscript? This is one of the few times you're going to use the first initials. So notice here, B. Koshru, Y. Koshru. So it would be, in our example, A. Freud and then S. Freud. So the first initial occurs when you have multiple authors with the same last name. What happens when you have a very prolific author, a writer? Well, what if you publish multiple articles in the same year, and it's not enough to say the year it was published. So we add lowercase letters A, B, C to indicate, well, which publication we're referring to. So Smith 1998A study on adolescent immigrants said ... When you see that, you know that there's going to be a Smith 1998B at a minimum. So that's how you would do that. What about emails? When you're citing emails in the body of the text, you say personal communication, the month, day, and year. But here's the thing. This is one place where your reference list and the body of the text will not match. the reference list is only retrievable information. So if you communicated with a scholar via email, you might cite it in the body of the text, but not the reference list because only you have access to your emails and it's a personal communication. All right. If it's an electronic document that does not have page numbers, then you have to talk about which paragraph it was in and which section it's in. So let's say you're doing an HTML document you're reading, you would say Smith 1997, the section it was in, the paragraph it was in, so that people could go back to that source. So now let's go to our reference list. So when we look at our reference list, we alphabetize by the first author's last name. We use hanging indents. And you'll notice a major change is that in the 7th edition, we give the full DOI hyperlink. So it used to be that we just wrote DOI 10 point, and now it's shifted. All right. So I think I covered, actually, I'll say it again. So when you're doing the authors' last names, it's last name, comma, first initial period, middle initial period, followed by a comma all the way till you get to the last author. You also, when you talk about the title of the article, you only capitalize the first letter of the first word or any proper noun or any punctuation that follows a colon. So the example given by Purdue University is the perfectly formatted paper. So if this was the title of the article in the reference page, the T would be capitalized, the H after the colon would be capitalized because it's after that punctuation mark, and then P of Purdue would be capitalized because it's a proper noun. So then in terms of the journals, you italicize the journal it was published in, you'll italicize the volume it was published in. So 12 is italicized, Journal of Economics is italicized. The issue number is not italicized. So open parenthesis 1, so this is issue number 1, followed by the page numbers. And then let's talk about some changes as it relates to books. When we were doing books, we used to have the city and the state that the book publisher was in included. So you'll see that New York, New York. Look at what it looks like in the 7th edition. New York, New York was pulled out. So anything in red, remove, or that's code for don't do it, or it's removed. So what about in the reference list? How many authors do you list? It used to be that you would list the first 7 and then do ... to the last author. Now, because we're doing a lot of joint projects because of the reproducibility project, we list the first 20 authors and then followed by ... So this is an example of the 7th edition, where after Turner, you get Lewis and Lee and Cox and Harris and all these people until you get 20. Now you will notice that we pulled the abbreviation DOI colon 10 point out, and now we're doing the full hyperlink. Now, I did notice in an earlier slide by Purdue University, they had the hyperlink in blue. You want to remove the blue from the hyperlink. Another change is if you're looking at a web page, you no longer use the term retrieve from, just put the hyperlink. And now another change, so we get rid of retrieve from, and another change in blue is that we italicize the title of the web page. So if you look in the 6th edition, Germany avoids recession was not italicized, but in the 7th edition, it is italicized. Now we have issues or versions. You'll notice that we used to specify in brackets the version, whether it was an ebook, a Kindle book, or whatever. It's so common now that we pulled the version out. we include the publisher now, and then we have the full hyperlink DOI. Now, again, this is related to gender neutral pronouns. Avoid using he or she, because that shows some bias in language. It implies that gender is somehow binary, and researchers are demonstrating that gender is not binary. So in this case, because we're using a gender neutral term, they would say how often they are cited. They are being plural. So other things, we no longer use the term the poor. We want to use person first language. So instead of labeling people as the poor, we say people first living in poverty, right? So we treat them as a person. We're more specific in age range. So we no longer say people over the age of 65 or older adults. We specify people in the age range of 65 to 75 to reduce bias. Additionally, we have tables. The principle of the table, there are 4 things that you want to see from the table. You label the table number. Then you do italicized left align the actual name of the title that you produce. Then you put your table there, and then any kind of notes you have, you put under the title. Those are the 4 things you need to know. And then when it comes to figures, you have your figure title, then you have your actual figure. If there's a source or caption, you put that below the figure. And that, my friends, is a very brief version of APA style. So I'm going to stop there, but I want you to go back to this anytime you're questioning how to write an APA style.